Narito ang programang totoong-totoo, Tambayan sa DWIZ. Programang magliliwanag ng ilang mahahalagang mga issue. Tambayan sa DWIZ. At ngayon, narito na sila upang maghatid ng saya sa bawat Pilipino. Sa programang Tambayan sa DWIZ.
Magandang tanghali, welcome to Tambayan. Magandang tanghali, welcome to Tambayan. Ako po si Trixie Cruz Angeles. Nag-share lang po ako, kaya kung nakikita niyo ako on cam already, pero hindi pa ako nag-greet. It's primarily because hindi pa tapos yung sharing natin. So, maraming salamat sa pagsubaybay sa Tambayan. Tambayers from Facebook and YouTube. We're on Facebook Live, by the way, para sa mga nakikinig sa atin sa radyo, lalong-lalo na dyan sa Tacloban, Leyte. Magandang tanghali po sa inyo lahat. Huwag kakalimutan, we are on Facebook Live and YouTube live streaming. Don't forget to like, share, and follow DWIC 882 AM. We're also on Luminous by Trixie Cruz Angeles and Ahmed Paglinawan. Don't forget to like and follow our Facebook page, and don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. So in the meantime, pag hindi nyo po nakikita kami dun sa newsfeeds niyo, just go to Luminous or to the DWIC Facebook pages at makikita nyo po yung live natin dyan. So in the meantime, today is a national holiday. It's the 30th of December, and we are celebrating the 125th anniversary of the martyrdom of Jose Rizal, na tinaguri ang national hero. Sinasabi natin tinagurian, and in fact, titignan ninyo and search online, Jose Rizal is considered the country's national hero or one of the country's national heroes. Bakit ginagamit yung word na tinagurian o kaya considered? Because there is no formal declaration of any of our heroes as national heroes or even as heroes themselves. But we consider them heroes. Now, this might spark another debate. Baka mamaya sinino hindi hero and so on. Well, yes, it's a good topic for debate as a matter of fact. And it is necessary to have that discussion and to continue discussing it. Kasi nga po, historians have a rule of thumb. It's not a hard and fast rule, pero normally you want to get some distance, which is when we say distance, a distance of time from the event or from the person's life. And from the time you consider him a hero, you can consider the acts that he has done as heroic acts. Pero yung idideklara mo na hero, matinding pagsusuri yan. At ang nagsusuri mga eksperto. We don't leave it up to the politicians, and certainly we don't make a declaration kapag immediately after the death or during his lifetime. Kasi nga, masyadong malapit at we tend to be ruled by our emotions on that. So you get the distance of time from the event before you make a declaration, or actually before you even you start to make a study. And at that point, then you may have a more objective discussion of whether or not that person deserves to be called a hero. So sa atin, wala tayong declarations by law. The declarations usually are going to be made by the National Historical Commission. Ayon ito sa Republic Act 10086. At ginagawa po natin yan because we want to leave it to the experts. Bakit hindi natin inaalaw na batas ang magdideklara ng ating mga national heroes? Because they will be subject to political considerations or the agenda of certain lawmakers who may or may not even be experts in the field. Nor will they actually be historians. Marami dyan, gusto nila magpangalan ng kalye para nagmumukhang heroic yung kanilang mga kamag-anak. And so you have things like the Ninoy Aquino International Airport, Sumulong Highway, and so on, that are named after family members of politicians who were sitting in office at the time that the naming has been made. Ngayon, dahil meron na tayong Republic Act 10086, ang pagpapangalan ng mga kalye, mga public buildings, there are two rules. Number one, hindi pwede sa buhay. And number two, kailangan dumaan sa National Historical Commission of the Philippines. Kailangan pagsurian muna bago maipapangalan ang isang kalye para sa anybody else or for the renaming of any of the streets. Kadalasan kasi favorite yan noon pa. It started in the 60s and went on in several decades na ipinapangalan natin after family members of politicians ang mga kalye, in spite of the fact that we know better. All right. But we can keep, however, the discussion civil. All right. It's the 30th of December, and as we said, it is Rizal's Day. And sinasariwan natin yung kahalagahan niya sa ating kasaysayan. So Rizal was tried by court-martial, and who was the first to recognize him as a national hero? It was Emilio Aguinaldo, and the declaration under the Aguinaldo administration of the First Philippine Republic was made as early as 1898. In other words, ito ang umpisa ng revolusyon. And why not? Why shouldn't they consider Rizal a national hero? He was, in fact, their figurehead. At yan ang nakapagpahamak. Yung Katipunan ang nagpahamak kay Rizal. Of course, he knew about it. He knew that they were making him a symbol. They had taken up his cause. They were using him as a figurehead, whether he wanted it or not. And in fact, they tried to actively recruit him into the Katipunan. Rizal refused, and by this time, he was already in Dapitan. Marami pa rin controversies about whether or not Rizal is deserving of being considered a national hero. Ang isa doon ay yung allegedly reformist ang stand niya. He wasn't pro-independence. He wanted reform. And by reform, kasama niya yung ilang mga propagandista, tawag natin sa kanila, di ba? The propaganda movement. And they were actively asking for equal rights, meaning yung mga Filipinos, not the Filipinos at the time, kasi ang Filipinos noon are Spanish nationals who were born in the Philippines and therefore called Filipinos because they were insulares, born in the Philippines. But if you were born in Spain and you were here in the Philippines, you were called the Peninsulares because you were born in the Iberian Peninsula. But they wanted to recognize what were called then the Indians, Filipinos, born, raised, and by blood Filipinos, to have equal rights as Spanish citizens, as these Spanish subjects, and to be considered as Spanish subjects. They wanted representation in the Spanish Cortes, which is the lawmaking body of Spain at the time. Parang yung House of Commons, ganun. Pwedeng yung parang magiging representative ang mga represented na ang mga Filipinos in the Spanish Cortes. This was what they were asking for. Since the movement of the Katipunan was towards independence, meaning Chugi, well, in its most basic sense, Chugi, yung Spanish colonial authorities, they were considered two different things. And so minsan dun sa debate tungkol kay Rizal, ini-include natin yung bakit siya gagawing hero? Reformista lang naman siya. Hindi siya humahangad ng independence. I think otherwise. I think Rizal is a very important historical figure, and yes, kailangan talaga pwedeng at the level of the national hero because it was a realistic movement at the time. La Liga Filipina was built to create or organized to create an awareness of our Filipino-ness separate, an identity separate from the Spanish. Na makilala tayo as Filipinos in the sense of the Indio, rather than the Filipino-Spanish national born in the Philippine Islands. Diba? So, this was realistic because once you were at the stage na represented na we had equal rights, we had representation and all, the idea of independence could be pursued later on. Kasi as it was, we were considered slaves, diba? We weren't at the same level. We weren't even considered citizens of colonial Spain. We were simply there. And it was Spain that was declared the property of Madre España, diba? And I think that one should have followed the other. The agitation for independence at the time did not seem realistic para kina Rizal. But if they had gotten equal rights as citizens and representation in the Cortes, baka later on, it would have been acceptable and possibly done with a lot less bloodshed. At least that's what the discussions were about. So yung mga debate na naman, it's like every year, di ba, pag Independence Day, di naman talaga tayo independent, true, ganyan. Where you're actually echoing, I forgot the name of the author, who proposed that we're a mental colony. Forgive the use of the term, pero that we're not really independent because we're tied to this and that. But I think now that Duterte has become president and our foreign policy has quietly been divorcing itself from the United States, then the idea that we are not truly independent must be again re-examined. Yung ganyang cliches, okay, I'm sorry to call it that, but if you're still advocating for that position that we're not truly independent, then I'm sorry, it's a cliche and you have to subject it to further scrutiny and further study. Don't get stuck into these old theories, including that ridiculous theory of a damaged culture. Excuse me. Anyway, re-examination. We also subject to re-examination itong mga debate na Rizal versus Aguinaldo, Rizal versus Bonifacio, because Bonifacio daw ay anak ng masa, dakilang anak pawis, etc., etc. Might have to be shelved until we have better information on Andres Bonifacio. Unlike Rizal, Andres Bonifacio, there are less what we call primary sources about him. Everything is secondary, eyewitness accounts, etc. Very, very few. In fact, we have only one extant picture of Andres Bonifacio, and whatever picture you see that is online of him, and that's it. That is it. Only one poem that we know that he made, Pag-ibig sa Tinubuang Lupa, still subject to possible controversy as to whether or not he wrote it, because, a poet doesn't write just one poem. But we do know that Andres Bonifacio was an artist. You know what he painted? But you didn't know that. He painted yung mga signs ng mga place. Yung parang karatula. He did that. He painted them. Magandang tanghali sa mga nakatambay sa atin sa YouTube. Owen Friday, Lady Punk, Pekka, Brian Miguel Dosono, Master of Debate. Leo, Francis Cayetano, Chow King, Sandy Navarro, X-Loss, Johanna Da Anton, Emer Liak, RJ 2002PH, Maria Cecilia Tiongson, Leo Greg Imperial, Alvin M, Herbie Basingel, Kavilog with JAT, Jackie Jack, Mel Mendoza, and of course, my favorite, Ma'am Pinay Paparazzi. Agad tanghali po. Ay, si Ma'am Senaida Javier, andyan din si Mikel R. And Christian Carlo Villarasa, maraming salamat kay Brian Miguel Dosono. Sabi niya, dahil pwedeng bumati dito, happy heavenly birthday, Ama Loreto. Tomorrow on New Year's Eve, first time without seeing your smile and hearing your laugh. Miss you lots. Happy New Year, TCA and Katambayers. Nakikiramay po kami. At maraming salamat. Buti nagkaroon kayo ng pagkakataon na i-commemorate dito at makisama kami sa commemoration ninyo, even in a small way, dito sa ating chat group or sa ating live chat sa YouTube. Meanwhile, yung mga nasa Facebook natin, magandang karanghali, Ma'am Babes Garcia, Min J. Igarashi, Riza Abella, DG Bank, Almilex, ang bagal talaga. Ang bagal ng Facebook natin. Sino pa bang nandito? J. Loquias, Lakap Andrew, Jean Slim, G. Oray, Greg Moran, Josie Urdas, Tolentino Marzo 22, Nelson Tandug, Emi Castro Mapala, Gigi Arroyo, Alma Muego Bando, Hasmin Orosa, Malukan Nimo Ferrer, Alvin Pabs, Estelita Requinton Lapus, Alexander, Nick Potrero, Marilu Laka, and so on. Dami nyo para rin, ha? Wag mo naman kakalimutan, konti pa lang ang live views natin sa Facebook natin. Magpakalimutan, like and share po. Like and share, like and share. Lalo na pag like and share ninyo sa Twitter, himatayin yung mga tao doon. sa tuwa. In the meantime, what other things do we recall about? Well, I think that in the end, it isn't fair to compare our heroes with each other, or to say that one is better than the other. Kasi magkakaiba sila, unang-una, ng pananaw with the Katipunan advocating for independence and the propagandist movement or the reformists advocating simply for reform. And we cannot say that one was better than the other either, because they were thinking of different solutions to a similar problem. So, sabi ni Ma'am Telia Balahadya, so glad you're holding the Carambola and Tambayan forts. Yep. We need to let Boss Conrad have his golfing time, and we need to let Atty. Ahmed have his own shop time. Medyo spoiled na lang, pero okay lang. Kala ko lang Tambayan, sabi ni Ma'am Sheila Abahero, di ko nakita kanina. So, watching from Northern Luzon, si Edgar Simon, hirap talaga magkalkal ng kasaysayan, sabi ni Scorpius 110475. Pwede kaya mahiram yung tungkod ng balintataw ni Nunong Imaw. Who's Nunong Imaw? Kanina pa ako lumalafang, sabi ni Ma'am Pinay, buti pa kayo. Ako din actually, I've been eating too much. I'm going to have to deal with weight gain pagkatapos ng New Year. Ma'am Josephine Angeles, sabi niya present daw sila ni Ma'am Jonalyn. Gandang tanghali kay Sir Romeo de Jesus. Bakit hindi bayani si President Ferdinand Marcos? Ano yung i-consider ninyo na act ng kabayanihan niya? Remember that these are outstanding acts. Although, you can't say rin na hindi siya kinoconsider na hero kasi war hero siya. And this is on a different level. We're not talking about him yet as national hero. But that will also require some time kasi kailan lang siya namatay. So usually, you discuss that 50 years after his death. Kasi the time of the proximity of his death, emotional pa yung mga tao, whether for or against, emotional pa yung mga tao. And so now, we're going towards a more objective discussion of his presidency. Pero kailangan pa ba natin i-deklara siya na national hero? Can't we just appreciate muna what he has done and then, accept that there are also failings in that? Hindi ba, kailangan ba, absolutes tayo? Do we really have to talk that way? I mean, that's so dilaw. Sila lang yung mahilig sa black and white, good versus evil, and that there's no such thing as shades of gray without taking into consideration human failings, diba? Or even context. Pinag-uusapan natin kanina sa Karambola, sinasabi ni Boss Jonad, the context of the Marcos years, hindi sinasama. Naalala niyo yung parating sinasabi sa atin, fake news kasi kulang sa konteksto. Ang konteksto ng Marcos years was also the threat of a communist takeover. But the emphasis not being communist, but actually in terms of the brutal communist regimes that were proliferating at the time, or they thought were going to proliferate in Southeast Asia, because the examples of, at the time, Vietnam and Cambodia were there for us to see. They had a really bloody insurgency that after the U.S. had left, particularly after they had left Vietnam, the regime that took over was bloody. It was cultural cleansing. They were killing people simply because they were educated. They were killing a lot. So that was the narrative. That was the context. And so the insurgents, we recognize them as wanting to foist a similar regime, a Pol Pot on us. And so this was it was a struggle on both ends. The state was, as with any state, needed to protect itself. And if they were going to have to match brutality with brutality, bakit yung mga insurgents hindi ba brutal? Weren't there stories also that were proliferating na yung mga pag nakita yung mga officers, pag may nahuli sila, hindi na nila hinuhuli, they would hack them, cut them up, and in very, very creative ways, and leave their bodies to be seen publicly by the townspeople, by people, mga nakatira dun sa mga rebel-infested areas. Dinidisplay talaga yung mga katawan to spark fear in the hearts of the ordinary townspeople there, as well as to remind the soldiers of who they were fighting against. It was, people seem to forget the brutality, but the narrative of the time was to consider the insurgents as heroes. Sila yung heroic because supposedly they were fighting against corruption for true, quote-unquote, independence of the country, regardless of the brutality of that. Nobody seems to be, in the cases for human rights violations, supposedly, filed against the Marcoses, missing in that context was also the brutality on the side of those who claim to be victims. They don't talk about that part. Instead, we are considered as, the Marcoses were considered black hats, they were the white hats, and never the twain shall meet. But the truth is that things are a little more complicated than that. The truth is somewhere in the middle of those narratives. That you can't, Marcos isn't a god. He wasn't perfect, but certainly he did try to protect the state. Certainly, their infrastructure projects. He did consider, he was one of the first presidents to push for culture and arts as an agenda of governance. There's so many good things. But we cannot also, it would also be unfair to any objective discussion to say that, he's at demigod level. No. The reason he could do so much was because he was educated, he was smart, he was a leader, people obeyed. He could spot talent. That was one of his best attributes. He had how do you call this? Parang all-stars, yung kanyang cabinet. Titong Mendoza, Solgen. Jaime Laya, Central Bank Governor, later on DepEd, and so on. Odi Corpus. Sino ba? He had the best and the brightest. Later on, the Yellows the opposition tried to destroy that image of Marcos people as being the best and the brightest when they were. Oh boy, they were. And up to now, we still appreciate some of their genius. Since tinatawag ang mga OFWs na bagong bayani, should they be entitled to be buried in libingan ng mga bayani pag namatay in the line of work? No, ma'am, that's not what the law says. May batas din po kasi kung sino yung naililibing, and those are veterans. The term bayani was equated with those who fought in actual battle. So, tapos later on, in-include dyan, national artists, national scientists, and presidents. So, yun yung limitations po dun. Ito, Scorpius has an interesting take. Sabi ni Scorpius 110475, why are they looking for heroes? For someone to lead and praise? When they made mistakes, they get vilified? Parang Harry Potter lang. Savior on one end and Dark Lord on the other. Shipo. Sabi ni Scorpius, yes. That's why, I agree to some extent. We have to take the acts. It should be the acts. Good acts deserve the praise. Kasi kung tao, yung gagawin mong pure white, gagawin mo, lagay ko sa pedestal, bayani ka. You will look on him as a person, and then the discussion about his acts, they get lost. Besides, ang hirap i-defend. You just find one sin, one grievous sin on the part of this person, and then kahit ikaw, yung credibility of that person is shot. We don't do that. We go through the acts. The acts will be far more objective than deifying or vilifying as a person. Everybody has their faults. Everybody makes mistakes. And also, there is such a thing as redemption. You could have been bad at one point, but redeemed yourself with an honorable or heroic act. On the other hand, you can also be a hero and then commit a grievous crime later on that will, in the eyes of people, negate all of the good that you have done. It becomes problematic when it is the person you're going to consider a hero rather than the acts themselves. The act is heroic. Sabi ni Clark Sam, ano sabi niyo sa mga kakampaign na puro mukha nila na nasa EDSA, mga bakod ng kapitbahay pinipunturahan ng mga kandidato nila is considered vandalism. We don't have a crime called vandalism. We have a crime called malicious mischief. A malicious mischief po is private property, or in the case of the state, pwede rin in the municipal government who owns the property in its capacity as a public entity or as local government, they can file a case for malicious mischief. Yeah, it's a crime. Is it considered vandalism? Well, it depends. Kung pumayag yung may-ari, edi hindi vandalism. Sabi ni Ma'am Pinay, ever ng Uncle Barry at libingan ng mga bayani, it gave me a chance to visit FM's burial site. Ngayon nagbabantay na sundalo sa puntod ni FM. Sana sa 2022, sabi ni Leo Greg Imperial, makaguest po uli kayo kay Attorney Nick sa Tambayan and magdrama uli kayo. Yes, we haven't fully explored the artistic side of Tambayan yet. Yes, we'll inform Attorney Nick. Tignan po natin. So, salute to PRRD, sabi ni Michael R. For celebrating Rizal Day, good thing Lenny Lorbedo is not around to make pag-ibig. Nice. Ganun talaga, sabi ni Ma'am Connie de la Cruz, balance of nature. Anong balance of nature? Balance of nature? Teka. Ang bagal kasi mag-load eh. When pagka clinic ko yung reply para hindi gumalaw at hindi mawala yun dun sa feed. Ang bagal naman mag-load ng page. Kakairita talaga our telecoms, no? Sige, I'll get back to you, madam. Yun. Finally. Bagal pa rin. Okay. And syempre, nawala. The movie Killing Fields, ganun ang nangyari noon sa Cambodia, sabi ni Gado. Muntik na mangyari sa atin kung di nag-declare ng martial law si FM. Ayan, sabi ni Ma'am Connie de la Cruz, balance of nature. Yung isa, biniyayaan ng mga brilliant cabinet, yung isa, sinalo ng mga salbahe mga cabinet. Ma'am, hindi po biyaya yun. Pinipili ang gabinete. Kaya nga sinasabi natin, matalino si Marcos, hindi siya worried about sharing the limelight with people who were either equally brilliant or far more brilliant in particular fields. Okay? He was not shy about going after the best and the brightest. Doon sa Cory cabinet, ano yung tawag natin nun? Cronyism. Cory cronyism. Yan yung na itinuloy naman doon sa BS Aquino regime na kapamilya, kabarilan, kaklase, and so on. It wasn't about yung kakayahan ng tao, pero kung saan sila, kung ganong ka-involved sa comfort zone ni BS Aquino yung mga yon, di ba? To some extent, the weakness of the Duterte administration could be related also to some of his appointees, such as but not limited to our favorites, Duque, Dar, and all that. Doesn't detract from President Duterte, but I was hoping for a deeper bench. Malalim ang bangko ni FM. Yeah, that's what I can say. Magandang tanghali. Kamusta naman po? Uy, mag-break muna pala tayo. Magbabalik ang Tambayan. Ang oras natin, 12:32 ng tanghali.
Muli nating balikan Tambayan sa DWIZ.
Nagbabalik ang Tambayan. Ako po si Trixie Cruz Angeles. Sabi ni Ma'am Glorine Castillo, attorney pabati naman, bagong matapos ang taon, wala nang ang kalendaryo. Sana kahit greet na lang. Bakit wala po kayong kalendaryo? Libre naman po. You can just ask anybody to pick it up at DWIZ Station, 5th floor, City State Center, 709 Shaw Boulevard, Barangay Oranbo, Pasig City. Ulitin ko po DWIZ is on the 5th floor of City State Center, 709 Shaw Boulevard, Barangay Oranbo, Pasig City. Yes, mayor naman si Kiko. Magandang tanghali. Oo, ma'am. Bati ko naman kayo basta nakikita ko kayo. Sabi ko, namimiss daw ng mga taga-YouTube ang Mangko Friday. So, tomorrow, Mangko Friday ako. But I think Attorney Nick is resting. Bigyan niyo naman ng pagkakataon magpahinga. Ako gusto ko nagtatrabaho ng New Year. Okay, nagtanong si Master of Debate. Sabi niya hindi daw confirmed yung death ni Bonifacio. That's not true. Ganito yun, no? May death certificate si Andres Bonifacio and it was shown, it was uncovered by Ambet Ocampo. I think you just need to search for his articles. Also, the remains of Bonifacio were recovered supposedly in Mount Buntis, and they were contained in a box. The box was brought to the National Museum for how do you call this? Not certification, to confirm. Wow, to confirm kung siya ngayon. Ngayon, ang nag-identify ng kanyang remains was his sister. Yung kapatid, sabi nila, may practice kasi yung mga Pinoy of dental modification. So, yung ibang mga katutubo, nilalagyan nila ng ginto yung ipin. Tapos, yung iba, fina-file nila. So si Andres Bonifacio used to file his teeth. Ang ginagamit was a shard of pottery. Tapos para dire-diretso yung ipin. Para dun sa mga nakikinig sa radyo, meron ako mga gestures na para magmukhang lahat ng ipin ay magiging pantay-pantay, fina-file nila yung ipin. And the skull that was recovered was confirmed by his sister as belonging to Andres Bonifacio precisely because of the dental filing, the evidence of the dental filing. So yun. So confirmed po yung death niya and there is a corresponding death certificate and the remains are identified. Ngayon, bakit ko sinabing dati nasa National Museum? Because it was recovered prior to the war and as you know, ang galing-galing ng US Air Force, kabilin-bilinan ni General MacArthur, huwag yung bombahin ang City of Manila. Instead, they declared it an open city at binomba pa rin nila. Kinarpet bomb nila ang Manila because of the retreating Japanese. The Japanese were conducting scorched earth, killing as they went along, and dead end nila was Intramuros. But as they were going, the Americans carpet bombed Manila, and one of the direct hits of those bombs was the National Museum, destroying so much of our pre-colonial artifacts, colonial artifacts, and so on. Among them, the skull and remains of Andres Bonifacio. Okay? Bakit hindi daw kino-commemorate ang kamatayan ni Bonifacio? Because of the controversy surrounding his death. I'm not sure if the may death certificate. So the death date is, recorded certainty. But bakit hindi kino-commemorate? Because nga, I think part of the philosophy in that is to commemorate his life rather than a controversial death. Also, yung kabayanihan ni Andres Bonifacio was being debated on in the 30s, which would have put it in the backdrop of the presidential debates. Doon nga first na isinugod yung pagiging national hero niya dahil ito ay pinropose ni Manuel Quezon. And he did that to embarrass Emilio Aguinaldo, his political opponent at the time. So, masyadong contested, yung masyadong controversial at the time, it was deemed best, at least I remember some of the DepEd policies were to commemorate his heroic acts such as but not limited to being the founder of the Katipunan. Kasi then, later on, yung controversy about him losing from being Supremo to becoming merely a cabinet member in the after the Tejeros Convention. Tejeros ba yun? Na after the elections, medyo napahiya siya. He went back to Cavite to rally up his forces and then challenge the Katipunan. Now this, under the context of wartime conditions and the fact that kung nakalaban niya was the Katipunan itself that he himself founded, would have considered it really super controversial kung doon natin titignan at yun ang i-commemorate natin. His life, his founding of the Katipunan is what most people pushed forward as a commemoration of Andres Bonifacio's life and times. Ano yung DNA? Anong pinag-uusapan sa DNA? Hindi po DNA identification yung kay Andres Bonifacio. Wala pa po nun, if ever. So, grabe Let me see. I'm just checking dito sa Facebook naman. Okay na, Ma'am Glorine, nabati na kayo. Happy na daw po ang 2021. Sabi niya, salamat sa bati. Dolores Doria Aguilar, sabi niya, naapi talaga ang mga Pilipino dahil sa wars and the invasion. Yes, but I don't like to think of, kasi nga, okay, yan ang mahalaga sa pag dinidiscuss natin ang kasaysayan, no? You can cast it as inspiring or you can cast it as another period of victimization. Your choice. But that is the power of history, the power of the narrative, the power of the story part. That is history. Remember that part of the term is story. So, sinustorify din natin. Storify is a journalistic term. Na ginagawa they take a bunch of facts and they create a story out of it so that people will understand what all of these facts are. Storifying. So, our historians really are people who storify all of these facts. We place it into context. Now some of these stories we push because they have an effect on the people. Like the way that Manuel Quezon storyified the execution of Bonifacio to demonize Emilio Aguinaldo. And he was so successful at it that many of us inadvertently and not knowing that they're echoing him, echo him. They repeat the same story over and over again. They're failing to take into consideration, doing to Emilio Aguinaldo what the Yellows had done to Ferdinand Marcos. They avoid certain facts, they avoid certain contexts because they have a particular story that they want to push. And yet when it is about our historical figures, it becomes very powerful, very effective. That's why we don't leave it to politicians to decide what are the important aspects of our history. We don't leave it to politicians to declare what should be commemorated, who should be declared, what we should study. Be careful when you say dapat nasa curriculum yan by law. You don't leave these things to politicians. You leave it to people who have the time and inclination to determine the effects of these studies, the effects of these declarations, and so on. Daming bati. Bakit wala masyadong tanong? Sabi ni Scorpio, sa Thailand, madam, 1 MB data service, napakabilis. Uy, iniinggit niyo naman kami. And our broadband and Wi-Fi equivalent to 566.40 pesos. Nang-iinggit naman kayo eh. Where's Bonifacio's skull nowadays? Obliterated. Thank you kay Ma'am Ida Galdiano. Nagpasalamat na ba ako? Sabi niya, may humble ambag theater news. Ambag to the nation building is worth emulating. Uy, madam, maraming salamat po. Bakit may smack wrestling na pinag-uusapan dito sa chat group? Grabe kayo. Magandang tanghali kay Fafa Jean Guzman, Ma'am Cynthia Paviliano. Sabi niya, it's 4 a.m. dito sa UK and watching you. Bigla na lang nagising. Normally team replay. Nako si Madam, baka bukas mas matindi ang pagising ninyo kasi Mangku Friday tayo bukas. Diba? Masaya yan. I'm still trying to figure out. Baka gusto ninyo umpisahan yung mga tanong for our Mangku Friday para makapag-research na. Sabi ni Joyce, sino ang pumatay kay Bonifacio? Would you believe it's a guy named Macapagal? Hanapin nyo. One of the people who allegedly shot Bonifacio is a guy named Macapagal, pero spelled with the K. It was Aguinaldo who signed the death warrant, yes, of course. Although initially he didn't want to. gusto niya i-exile si Bonifacio sa Guam. Pero sabi ng mga advisors na Aguinaldo, basta buhay yan, manggugulo yan. Which I don't think was really bad advice either. Yun nga lang, I say we because it was the Aguinaldo administration, the first Philippine Republic, who executed Bonifacio. So, we executed one of the founders of the Katipunan. Now, one of the things that we have to one example of how we should be more objective when we're discussing history. Tanungin natin, we placed the Katipunan as one of the most important organizations kasi it pushed for Philippine independence. Yes. How good or how effective was it? How, were they always altruistic? Were they always, heroes? I think that the men and women of the Katipunan did commit many heroic acts, but there were some things also that, halimbawa, sila yung nagpahamak kay Rizal. Rizal was tried for the founding of the La Liga Filipina. But at the time, the Cuerpo de Vigilancia documents indicated the investigation was on the Katipunan. So, ang ginawa nila, i-declare din ng mga investigador na subversive yung La Liga Filipina. In the same way that the Katipunan was also subversive. So, damay. Damay si Rizal. Okay. Ang pumatay ba kay Andres Bonifacio ay kapatiran din niya? Di naman bago yan sa mga nag-aalsa. Well, yeah, kasi it was the Aguinaldo administration and that was the Katipunan. Diba? It became the first Philippine Republic. So, may intriga. Ano to sinasabi ni Hardchaps? Were comments and questions not read? Selective ba dapat? Excuse me? I choose questions at random. Pero kaloka, may accusation kagad. Maghanap ka nga ng ibang host na ganito katindi yung question and answer portion. Tapos grabe. Di po ba may mock election ngayon? Di po ba malalaman result? Mock elections? Mock elections. Well, mock elections are similar to survey. So, who's conducting it? Patanong naman. Marian Miguel Dosono is asking my thoughts on Torre de Manila. Why would you ask my thoughts on Torre de Manila? I was as legal counsel of the NCC at the time, so of course I am anti-Torre de Manila. I was supposed to handle the case for the National Commission for Culture and the Arts. It was strongly suggested, but at the time, the person who handled it was then Solicitor General Florin Hilbay. As we all know, they lost. So why are we bringing up the Torre de Manila? Because of the Rizal Monument? I think it's sucky. That's it. That's my comment and my thought on that. Sabi ni Mel Mendoza, si Kiko, di niya matanggap na inilibing si FPM sa libingan ng mga bayani, pero tanggap niya yung aso ni Cory na nilibing doon. Wow. I'm still stuck on his comments na DDS tsaka Dilawan. Pare-pareho naman tayong Pilipino. Kailangan magkaisa tayo. Wow. Parang ang sincere mo. Di halata. Sabi ni Scorpius, maybe Aguinaldo deemed it pragmatic to have him executed. Bonifacio probably had enough power to turn the tables on him if given enough time. Turn the tables, I think you need to be more precise. Turn the tables means that, okay, may inaccuse sa'yo and you turn the tables, the accuser now becomes the accused. It's also possible, ganito yan a traitor, kasi he rallied forces to go against the government of Aguinaldo. So by the lights of the government at the time that has to protect the government, has to protect the state, Bonifacio is a traitor. And during wartime, traitors are shot. So because you don't give them another chance once you catch them. That is the truth of wartime conditions. That not just turning the tables, which means the accuser becomes the accused, but actually you stop them from doing something that endangers the state again. And because Aguinaldo was a dictator, it was a dictatorship by necessity, that he was the state, or at least part of it. Ako din, 1:45 p.m. na ako nakaabot, sabi ni Chev. Oops, sorry. May any chance na maayos ang treason sa saligang batas? Wala po kasi sa saligang batas ang treason. Okay, and that's another thing we need to educate people on. People seem to think that when the criminal laws don't work, or you think that people get away and so on, the people have cases dismissed, people that you want to see in jail, it's a problem with the Constitution, not necessarily. The crime of treason appears in the revised penal code, and the Supreme Court has interpreted to mean that it is only a wartime crime. So in order to fix that, you only need the Senate and Congress to enact a law. You don't have to change the Constitution. Believe it or not, guys, for those of you who are so against the 1987 Constitution, and again, let's not make it personal. Okay? Certainly there are faults in it, but I don't think it's basura. I mean, completely basura. And not all the faults and failings of the justice system can be equated with the failing of the 1987 Constitution or the bad draftsmanship of the 87 Constitution. There is a difference. Feels like it's the very case. Okay, so you're talking about the COVID patient. All right. Ito naman sa sino daw po, sabi ni Eric Luna Layaban, sino ba po ba nagpapatay kay Ninoy Aquino? That's what Cory didn't want us to find out. Baka natalsikan siya ng electric current kaya malakas mag-demand. Attorney, sabi ni Ma'am Connie de la Cruz. Erenito Roque is watching from Thornhill, Ontario. Okay. Grabe, bakit ang hina ng mga tanong ngayon? But correct to say that it was a pragmatic thing. Yeah. Madam, habang tumatagal lalo kayong gumaganda, keep it up, sabi ni Life Adventure. Wala pa pong Maria. Kahit tanghali na, wala pa pong Maria. Sabi ni Clark, may chance po bang may balik at may privatize na dapat na nasa gobyerno? Mga na-privatize na dapat sa gobyerno, tubig, kuryente, gasolina. Kung mangyayari man, maipush po ang susunod na maupong presidente. Yes, but it requires legislation. And of course, it is going to be challenged. Ito yung problema, binigay natin dun sa mga korporasyon na to. And because binigay natin yan, they have grown bigger, stronger, richer. And ano yung mindset nila? Big, strong, and rich. Feeling nila they should get more in law. Well, let's see. It is possible, but is it probable or likely? We don't know. Because what we're going to do will be taking on very strong, very rich, very determined corporations and taking away from them their gripo. So let's see. It is possible. But it will depend on a lot of factors, a president who pushes for it and a cooperative legislature. We just discussed the name of someone who escaped the quarantine facility upon arrival from the US. She's positive on Omicron variant. Trending siya ngayon sa Twitter. Names? May name? May name ba to? Ito, sabi ni Scorpius, hala, madam, galit ang mga feng sa mga diktador. Paano ba yan? One of our known heroes as well as president ay isa palang diktador. Wait, Cory was a dictator. Did they not know that? Ayaw nga nilang sabihin yan. Pero kasi the definition of a dictator is when the powers are, most of the powers or all of the powers of governance are vested in a single person. That's how you call them a dictator. So in Cory's time, during 1986 and under the 86 Revolutionary Constitution, she exercised legislative and executive powers, and she was the one who determined whether or not the courts were going to remain open, which made her the person exercising 2, if not 3, powers of government. 3 out of 3 or 2 out of 3. Dictatorship. So, yeah. Kasi what they do is they equate dictatorship as a bad thing, and therefore they cannot accept it when you say, wait, Cory exercised all of those powers, therefore she was a dictator. And so they'll say, no, but she was a good person, not a dictator. And that's the problem when your definition of dictatorship is bad, automatically bad. Hindi ba pwedeng a dictator is a person who exercises all powers of government? Now, if that person exercises it in a manner that hurts people, then he would be a bad dictator. And then there's such a thing as a benevolent dictator. Sabi ni Chev, yes, I don't want to jump to conclusions since there's no confirmation yet. Mahirap na ma-electric current. I agree. But it is also fortunate that unlike there's a specific law for HIV and AIDS patients and victims, you can't disclose their names, diba? Pero dito sa COVID, that there's no specific what do you call this provision. I have to look at 11332 again. Pero yung pagbubulgar ng pangalan ng mga positive is not on the same level as that of HIV and AIDS patients. Thank you kay Life Adventure for your super sticker. Sabi ni Al RKZA. Happy New Year. Stay safe. Always watching from Edmonton, Alberta. One of the coldest places on earth right now, minus 35 degrees. Oh my gosh. The coldest I'd ever experienced was something like negative 20, negative 26 when I was still in school in the University of Minnesota. Cripes, that was cold. Sabi ni Flavie Serapi ko, parang pinagbabayaran ninyo si Attorney Trix kung makademand. Kaloka. Thank you, Flavie. I really appreciate that comment and you make me laugh. Thank you very much. Melchizedek Ricafort, magandang tanghali po sa inyo, Ma'am Eva Arnborg Forsberg. Wait, ganda naman ang pangalan. Aguinaldo rank in Katipunan is general. What is Bonifacio's rank? Supremo at the time that he was the Supremo. After that, he was cabinet. Hiwalayin niyo po yung Katipunan na army, as an armed force, and the Katipunan as a government. Yeah. Baka natalsikan ng electric current, kaya malakas mag-demand. Happy ni Ma'am Connie. On that note, maraming salamat sa lahat ng sumubaybay sa Tambayan itong araw na ito. And we will be on Tambayan and Carambola tomorrow, last broadcast for the year. And then officially, we will be back next week, Carambola and Tambayan. Tapos na mag-golf si Boss Conrad. Ang Tambayanan, susunod na programa in the heart of business, kasama si Ma'am Marupa Hatisarni at Sir Lito Gagni. We'll see you tomorrow on Carambola, 8 to 10 in the morning sa DWIC 882 AM. Ako po si Trixie Cruz Angeles. Guys, have a good day!
Tambayan sa DWIZ.